Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kristine. In today's video, I will be talking to you about how to find and screen good tenants. And I will be sharing the criteria that I specifically use to screen tenants for my own rental property. So if you like this video, give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, follow me on my Instagram and my other social media accounts, and let's get to it. So there are pretty much three different ways that I would say to find a tenant. The first way is the most hands-off approach. It is by using a property manager. So I personally self-manage my properties, but I know landlords that have time constraints, or they just don't like the tenant interaction and they don't like doing that tenant onboarding. They will just hire a property manager to do this for them. And of course, if you have a property manager doing this, they are going to take some of that cash flow. And that is another reason as to why I choose to self-manage my property, because I want to keep as much cash flow at this point in my life as possible. So another way to find and screen tenants is by using a realtor or real estate agent. And I personally have used this technique, but it definitely depends on the state that you live in. I currently live in North Carolina, and from my understanding from talking to other, landlords and real estate agents, they don't really do that. In this state, if you want to have someone else find a tenant for you, you have to use a property manager. You don't really use a real estate agent or a realtor. But in New Jersey, where my duplex is, it is very common for landlords to use a real estate agent or a realtor to find their tenants. And that is definitely what I have done. I've used my real estate agent that has helped me buy the property in the first place. He has helped me find all of my tenants for one of the units. So in my rental property in New Jersey is a 2-family, if you don't know. And one of the units I rent out as a long-term rental, and the other unit I rent out as a furnished medium-term rental. And that is the unit that I actually lived in and house hacked for 2 years. So for the long-term rental, I always use a realtor because it just makes the most sense. Don't have to do as much of the work, and I don't have to pay for that because in New Jersey, the tenant or the applicant is the one that pays a broker's fee, which is typically like 1 month's rent, to the realtor. So I don't really have to do anything. The realtor is the one that finds tenant. He posts the listings, Zillow and wherever else he posts it, and he'll run the checks, he'll have them fill out applications, and pretty much in that process, I just have to look at all the applicants and review their applications, do some phone interviews, and ultimately pick the best candidate for the unit. So I really like that approach. I'm not going to change it for the long-term rental, and that works for me. So the third way to find and screen a tenant is by doing it yourself. Like I said, in the other unit in my 2-family house in New Jersey, I rent it out as a furnished medium-term rental. I do that screening myself because I find tenants through Furnished Finder typically, or Facebook Marketplace, and I'm the one that screens and finds the tenants there. So I'm going to share the criteria that I specifically use during that process with you. It's a very similar process for a long-term rental as well. In the first initial messages with the tenant, I will typically ask them for a proof of employment, a copy of their driver's license, and the contact information of a previous landlord, as well as filling out an application if they are then interested in applying for the unit. So I actually use a rental property management software to do all of this, as well as to do a lot of my landlord things, such as collecting rent, handling maintenance requests, tenant communication, signing leases, tenant screening, and tenant onboarding, and all of that stuff. So it's really, really helpful to have a rental property software, especially if you're managing out of state like I am. And it doesn't matter if you have one property like I do, or technically it's 2 units, or if you have a bigger portfolio. I definitely think it's useful to start those systems and get organized by using a rental property software from the beginning. So I personally use Inago, and it has everything that I need. Like I said, it does the lease signing, the tenant screening, it does tenant communication, handling maintenance requests, collecting the rental income, all so that I'm able to manage from out of state very seamlessly. So since I use Inago, the rental property software, that is where I have them fill out applications if they are interested in applying to be a tenant for the unit. So what Inago asks for from the tenant is they get their personal information, They get their salary, their monthly income, and most importantly, it runs a background check, a credit check, and an eviction check, all for the price of $35 currently. And I actually don't have to pay that fee. The tenant or the applicant is the one that pays that fee. As the landlord, you are able to pay that fee for the applicant or the tenant if you want to, but I don't see why you would, and I don't think most people do that because it's pretty common for the applicant to pay that fee themselves. And typically, since, like I said, I do this process for my furnished medium-term rental, that means that there are a lot of traveling professionals, traveling nurses who have medical backgrounds. And if they are a traveling nurse or traveling medical professional with their proof of employment, I typically don't need to run a background check because their employer, especially in the medical field, requires them to do a background check themselves. So then therefore I will just run the other checks. But if it's not a traveling professional, then I will run all of the checks in order to do my due diligence. So, like I said in the initial messages, I ask for the previous landlord's contact information. And this is part of the due diligence. You need to call, that previous landlord and that reference in order to get more information about the tenant that wants to rent out your unit. So these are some of the questions that I ask the landlord. I ask them, does the tenant have any outstanding rent due? Did the tenant leave your property in an acceptable condition? Would you rent the tenant again? And is there anything else I should know about the tenant? Do you think that I should rent to them? And those are pretty much all the questions that I ask the landlord, and it gives you a pretty good idea of whether the tenant is a good tenant to rent to or not. So you definitely want to have that positive reference ultimately. After you do that due diligence and you have applications from potential tenants, then you have to review the applications. And this is when you really have to stick to your criteria in order for everything to be fair. You want to make sure that you're giving each tenant a fair chance to rent your unit, and you're doing it strictly based on criteria, not based on anything else. You're not discriminating against anyone, none of that stuff. So you have to make sure you're using criteria in order for things to be very black and white and fair. So when I review someone's application, one of the things that I checked is making sure that they have, their proof of employment and they have a steady employment history. You definitely don't want to rent to someone that can lose their job, or, sometimes they'll be working and sometimes they're not working and they have that inconsistent job history. You want to be able to make sure that the tenant pays rent. Another thing is to make sure that the tenant's monthly income is at least 3 times the rent. And like I said before, you want to make sure that the tenant can comfortably afford to pay the rent. You don't want it to be outside of their budget, and you just want to make sure that it kind of makes sense for them and they wouldn't not be able to pay rent every month and on time. Another thing to look for is the credit score. You want to make sure they have a good credit score, which is, different depending on what the landlord is looking for. I personally have had tenants that have only had really great credit scores. They were pretty much all in the 700s. And it's because my house that I have in New Jersey is in an A-class neighborhood. It's in a really safe, good neighborhood. It's 10 minutes from New York City. There's a lot of families. It's just a very well-known town. So I only have good candidates that apply there for that reason. But I would definitely say you would want to have a tenant that has at least a 620, 640 credit score, or else, if they have a lower credit score, you'll kind of be risking whether or not they're going to be paying rent on time to you. And at the end of the day, if you don't get that rental income, then you are losing money, and this is your business and you need to take it seriously. So other things you want to look in the application is to make sure they have a clean eviction history, no evictions, and a clean background check as well. So those are pretty much the criteria that I use when screening tenants. So ultimately, if you are not able to meet your tenants kind of face to face, I always like to at least make sure I can do a video call or FaceTime with them. I'm a small business. I'm kind of like a mom and pop. So I always like to make sure you can have at least some sort of face-to-face interaction with that tenant if you're not able to, for example, meet them in person, if you're not doing like the house showings with them or, the rental unit showings with them. So whether or not I'm the one that's screening the tenants or my realtor is screening the tenants, I always do this step. I'll always kind of FaceTime or do a video call or Zoom call with the potential tenant that is applying, just to kind of talk to them and get a good feel of whether it would be a good match. So these are the questions that I ask them when I do that call. I ask them how long have they lived in their current house, why are they moving, when would they like their move-in date to be. I ask them what they do for work, how much money they make, whether they have pets, whether they have a car, whether they smoke. I ask them how many people would be living with you in the unit, have you ever broken a rental agreement, and I always like to review all of the fees, the monthly rent, and the security deposit just to confirm and make sure that they're okay with paying all of that, because ultimately if they're not, then they're not a good fit. So that is pretty much the screening process that I use to find tenants, and it works for me. I have the best tenants right now. They always pay early, and I really don't have that difficult of a time managing out of state because I have great tenants and also because I use that rental property software. I will share the rental property software that I use in the description box below if you guys are interested in trying it out. I definitely recommend it. It's free. I don't pay any money for it. And it really is a game changer in my small rental, my real estate investing business, my landlording business. And that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, if you did, give this video a big thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.